All right, we're close. We're pretty close to 10 o'clock. So, Teresa, should the monitor be on if you're listening? Give me 1 second. Oh, there you are. Okay. That's from our text. Ooh, that's loud. It's got an echo. How about now? Is that better? I think so. Did y'all hear me okay? Pretty good? Yep. All right. So this is part of what we're going to get to today. This is in chapter 2. Hopefully we'll get to this. To me, that's probably the best part of chapter 2. But all right, so let's go ahead and come to order. Prayer pad. We'll start with Mary Pat. And then you can also email Betty Hips. Hopefully you received an email. If you haven't, that's because we don't have your email. So if you would, if you don't receive an email from Elizabeth Hips, normally on Monday afternoon, let us know. Or if you want to receive the emails, 2 ways that we sort of keep up with everybody. One is prayer pad. People can write down their prayer requests, and then we make a copy at the break and then pass those out. And Betty also takes them and compiles them with the email or the electronic prayer requests and then sends those out. Probably, I think she's having eye surgery this week, tomorrow, so might not get it until, maybe sometime. So, but anyway, that's just FYI. As for announcements, October 23rd, that's St. Paul for All. Normally what we've done is pre-COVID days, we would have maybe 10, 12, 13 different work sites in Columbus. At some point on that Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, we go out and we work on those sites. We're doing everything in-house this time because what we want to do is sort of address food insecurity. We're going to do that 2 ways, one on a global level, which means we need you to sign up for a shift. It's an hour long. It's going to be in our youth building, and all you're doing is making food bags, kind of like what we did with the hurricane buckets. What's that? No, just need warm bodies and hands. That's it. So I mean, you're actually overqualified, all right? And but just what we'll do, we want to make 25,000 bags, all right? So it's a lot, and but we want the whole church, and we'll start making the bags like at 9 a.m. in the morning, and we'll run I think the last shift is like 1 o'clock or something. October 23rd, that Sunday, and I think we chose that date because all the teams are traveling. So I think this is in line with I'm thinking that's in line with the football schedule. But between now and or really in the month of October, but we can start now. If the global push is for the food bags, then on the local level, we want to help aid Winton Neighborhood Network, which is in dire need of food to distribute. A rising inflation environment creates a more drastic, just environment for those that struggle with food insecurity. So the food banks that Winton Neighborhood Network traditionally get their food from, they're limited now, which means then the distribution arms are limited. So what we want to do is we want to fill up our Boy Scout trailer. So it's it's a good-sized trailer full of food items, non-perishable food items. You can look around the church or definitely in Kathy's area. There's examples of what that might look like. You can either go and purchase those and bring them to the church the next time you go to like if you go to the grocery store, or we're going to find out what the actual dollar amount. I think it's like $39 to buy one of everything, or something like that, or less. I don't have the exact number, and then we'll buy it. Either one doesn't make any difference. We just want to fill up Winton Neighborhood Network because November and December is a great need in our community, as you would imagine. So. like food bags or I don't, not for us in the last 10 years, all right? So, but there are churches that do. There's a church in Macon that I was a part of, and they started something called Fill It Up Giveaway, and they took an entire tractor trailer, and they tried their best to fill it up, and then they would give it away to various areas. So they're all kind of help. We actually wanted to do this in 2020. So we had already been talking to this group out of Atlanta, which is where one of the headquarters of the global distribution places are located. And of course, COVID hit, and nothing was going on then. So now that we're sort of out of it, we definitely want to pick that back up. And it just happens to be in a time where this is of even greater need than, say, it was 2 years ago. So anyway, October 23rd, go ahead. And I think this. You can sign up online. You can sign up, probably here with Kathy. Don't hold me to this, but I know the online sign-ups, if they're not ready now, it'll be like, within the next 3 to 4 days. So just kind of put that in, and it doesn't have to be a St. Pauler. If you want to participate, come on. It's a perfect time for like a family to do something, or I think the cutoff is like 4 years old or something. So if you want to take grandchildren, because really all you're doing is sitting there and you're taking a bag and you're just putting stuff in it and you just kind of rotate around. But yeah, so it's a large task. What we want to do, what?
We don't need to fill out the buckets too because of the hurricanes. Better check with Encore.
Yeah, so that could be coming on a Wednesday night. Once we see how bad what that looks like, and obviously that's I think supposed to reach landfall for the states Wednesday in the a.m., like maybe 3 a.m. I know it's a Category 3 now. I don't know if maybe it'll strengthen to a 4. So hopefully it's not as bad, but that could be something that shows up in a couple of weeks, just once everything passes through and we see how bad the destruction is. So, yeah, so this that time of year when it comes to hurricanes for us, St. Paul for all, but it's October 23rd. Any other announcements we need to hit before we begin? All good? All right. Well, I appreciate your patience from last week. I was down and I got confused on my dates. And so when I realized it was, oh, yeah, I'm going to be gone on Sunday night to Wednesday morning, it was too late to, everybody else's schedule was full. So anyway, appreciate your patience. All right, well, let's pray and we'll begin. Oh God, as we gather in your name for this, we are grateful. What we always pray whenever we study the Scriptures is that we want the Scriptures to be used in a way that it becomes the gospel. And with the addition of your Holy Spirit, it becomes life application for us. We always want to learn for knowledge's sake, but at the same time, we want it to be a life application to where it's not just what we know, it's what we know and then how we live, and then ultimately how we interact with you and how we interact with everyone else. So guide this process, whether we're here in this room or whether we're at home participating online, or whether someone's watching this in the days, the weeks to come. We really don't care on the when. We definitely want the process to take place in us, and we ask this now in your name. Amen. All right, so we're in Daniel chapter 2. A little recap from Daniel 1. So when the book of Daniel opens, or when we begin the book of Daniel, it's in the third reign of a certain king, king of Judah. The Babylonians are on the march. They first take over the southern kingdom of Israel, and they put a puppet king in place. That works for just a little bit. Eventually, they get rid of the puppet king, and Nebuchadnezzar, who at this point, just before the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar is the son of the Babylonian king, and Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar is the chief general. So he flattens out Judah, which is the southern kingdom. Think of Jerusalem, and then deports the best and brightest. At this point, they would be maybe 13, 14 years old, and Daniel is one of them. And there are others that we know. We know 3 by name, but then there would have been others, more than just the 4 of them. They deport them back to Babylon, which is Iraq. I think that's that region. And they begin to indoctrinate them into the Babylonian way. And so it's a 3-year program. And it's not just what's going on with these young men from Judah. It would have been other areas that that the Babylonians conquered. Their MO is that they would take the best and brightest, send them back, indoctrinate them through their 3-year period of time. After the process was over, they would be graded to some degree, and then that would determine where they ended up in some level of government work or work inside of the kingdom of Babylon. So when we first are introduced to Daniel, this is after that deportation. Daniel and the others they're placed in the program. And the first thing we discover about Daniel is Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they come up with a deal, or at least some level of a contrast between, so that they could remain faithful with dietary laws compared to Old Testament practices, to what was being offered to all these newly deported young men. And what we have at the end of Daniel chapter 1 is they go through a period of time, and then the sort of like the Potiphar, if you think of back to Genesis, the one that's over those group of young men, determines whether or not they're more fit or less fit than those that are eating from the king's table. We ended last week where what they conclude is that Daniel and the 3 are better fit than the others, and so they're able to keep their diet and, of course, remain faithful to their dietary restrictions and the laws as prescribed from the Old Testament. Now, when we move into chapter 2, there's going to be a period of time, and it gives us some insight that it's the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. That doesn't mean it was just 1 or 2 years. It's been at least 3 years removed. So any questions on chapter 1, since it's been 2 weeks since we met, that either was unclear from the last time we met, or if there's just a question that you've had with further reflection. All good? All right, so let's jump into the text, and what we're going to do is we're not going to read the whole chapter all at once. We're going to go through it a little bit at a time. I'll start us with verse 1, and then we'll look at some other passages. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. So we do know it's in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. That's probably 3 to 4 years after chapter 1. Because one of the questions that we'll ask here in a minute is Daniel and the 3, are they finished with the 3-year program? And most people would agree that they are finished with the program. So it's at least, depending on when we date chapter 1, it's at least 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe even 4 years since chapter 1. But it's not a large time or a long time. But there is some level that they're out of this training program, and they have some level of job or some level of status with Nebuchadnezzar. So, what's interesting, just again, most people believe that Daniel and 3 have completed the program, because as we read the text, we're going to discover that all those that are grouped as wise men, they all have a sentence of death placed upon them because of what eventually what we'll read, which means that Daniel and what we conclude is that Daniel and 3 have completed the program, so now they're in the wheel of all those that have some level of wisdom or knowledge and work for the king. So Daniel's probably 17, 18 years old. We do know that Nebuchadnezzar, if you look at in verse 1, it says that Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, plural. We're only going to deal with one dream. So, there's a little bit of, is it just one dream? Is it multiple dreams? It could be that he had the same dream over and over. That's not that big of a deal. What's the real issue is that because of his dreams or dream, at least the one that we're going to look at, he is greatly troubled by it. Does anybody have anything other than troubled in your Bibles? Yeah, it does not sleep. Yeah, there's two. Disturbed, troubled. Yeah, so it's a plural word, but the rest of the chapter is just one dream. The actual literal translation is that his spirit was struck as if struck with a fist, and that he couldn't sleep. Maybe even like panic attacks. I mean, it's that level of struggle for Nebuchadnezzar. What we do know is that because of he's either troubled or disturbed, can't sleep, maybe something like a panic attack, that because he Nebuchadnezzar recognized that there's something about this dream that is of vital importance. And what we do know about the ancient Babylons is that they were very much into dreams as a medium for understanding, as a medium for wisdom, and they believed dreams were a way that the gods spoke to people. And so understanding of the dream was critical, at least for Nebuchadnezzar. Now, what we can do is try to put ourselves inside the text, in the situation. I mean, so you got Daniel's probably 17, 18 years old. And a little bit, we're going to get to where Daniel is involved in this dream and the interpretation of it. Just think about the magnitude. I mean, what were you doing at 17 and 18, right? So, I don't even think I knew what day of the week it was. So, the fact that here, Daniel you're going to see something about his character and his nature. But then also Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar he's 2 years into his reign. He's taken over for his father. And, so he's a new king. And what we do know about the Babylonian royalty, as it was for all the others, different kingdoms and people at that time, is it's constantly filled with revolts and murder and one-upmanship. And, you can think back to some of your British history. Maybe that'd be the closest comparison. Well, it was no different here. I mean, after Nebuchadnezzar, the next two kings of Babylon are actually assassinated. So, I mean, it didn't show up in the Bible, but we figured out through non-canonical sources. So this idea that all of a sudden he's going to have this dream, and you're going to see that the dream to some degree is about him, you can imagine that would be a level of anxiety for him. Here he is, a new king, and you're most vulnerable when you're just in the beginning of your reign. And so we can see that there's, this isn't too far-fetched from the idea of he's troubled and he can't sleep, because the main characters are going to be Nebuchadnezzar. They're going to be what we call the wise men. Daniel's going to break them down by titles, and then you're going to get Daniel in play here in a little bit. So that's the setting. It's early on in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. It's probably 3 to 4 years after Daniel, or after Daniel chapter 1. So he's a young man, and there's something going on with the king to the point that he is majorly disturbed, and he can't sleep. All right? So if someone would read then verses 2 through 6. Yeah, so not a small task, right? And pretty high stakes. I mean, if you think about it. So we do have some level of a breakdown, and we talked a little bit about this 2 weeks ago, between where Daniel will say the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans are astrologers, depending on what version of the Bible you have. And they're all considered sages. They're all considered wise men. I mean, some of them are what we would probably call more like astrologers, where they're looking at the skies and trying to chart the planets. I mean, there was actually I think his name is like Namarabu. Namarabu was the first or the first greatest Babylonian astrologer. And he was one of the first to, by charting the planets' movements, to conclude that that a year, one trip around the sun, was, I think he said, 365 days, 6 hours, 41 minutes, 15 seconds. But he was only off by just a little bit. And so you've got just, some of them are what we would call like magicians, sorcery. And some of them were benevolent, some of them were sinisters. Of course, that's something that's outlawed in the Levitical code. And then you've got those that studied the planets. You have some that their whole work was around dreams. And they actually had Babylon had a number of dream interpretive books where they would study the dreams and sort of come up with a kind of like a horoscope type deal. If the sky's black, it means this, and what have you. Does anybody dream and you see the color red? I mean, most people do not. This just has nothing to do with the Book of Daniel. I'm just curious. I mean, most people do not dream most people don't dream in color, and then seldom. This is just this is like you're on Jeopardy, right? So, but most people don't see the color red in dreams. So anyway, not that it matters. I mean, for all you Georgia fans, right? So you're probably dreaming in red. So what's that? Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so you'll. What does he know, right? So but there is some level of a breakdown amongst just the classes of people that would be considered what we call the wise men. Or the magi, those type persons, and who studied either the stars, studied the events of the world to try to somehow predict the future, or at least give some level of explanation of what's going on. But whether or not you want to get into the weeds of what each one of those classes are, I mean, I'm sure you could if you wanted to. But the bottom line is there's a group of people that historically in the Babylonian wheel are used to aid the king or to aid the ruler in understanding either current events or future events. And it's this group of people that Nebuchadnezzar has laid this very large task upon them, which is, don't just tell me the interpretation, but first tell me what? The dream itself. So, yeah, good luck at that one. I mean, that's like predicting the lottery numbers, right? So, anyway, so it's important, I mean, to some degree. We do have this, so if you have a study Bible, your study Bible also probably tells you that the language changes from Hebrew to Aramaic. So if you had the original text of Daniel, chapter 1, and then this little bit into chapter 2, the first part of that is Hebrew. And then from when it changes to Aramaic, it'll be in Aramaic from 2 to chapter 7. And then it'll switch back to Hebrew. What most scholars believe is that Daniel has incorporated, he would have been a part of this because he was in the wheel for 80 years, that he's also using the official documents of Babylon. Does that make sense? And so they spoke Akkadian, all right? So that was kind of like the that was kind of like the local language or the vernacular. The official language of Babylon, when they wrote things down, was Aramaic, but they also knew Hebrew and some other dialects. But here, for just if not that it matters, but if your study Bible might mention that. So I just wanted you to be aware of it. That the actual language changes to Aramaic, normally to indicate this was some level of official writing. So most likely, maybe this is Nebuchadnezzar's record of the events, and Daniel is just sort of incorporating those in. So he lays the task before them. This is what he wants to know. He wants to know what the dream is and the interpretation. And of course, their answer in verse 4, O king, live forever, which is, they're not trying to butter him up, all right? So this is just a typical response of how they would address a Babylonian king. So, but tell your servants the dream and we'll show the interpretation. And of course, the king has good reason to not tell them this, because if he's troubled about perhaps this could be, maybe the dream is foretelling of future events for him, as in maybe the end of his reign. Maybe there's a plot. If you go back and look at all the Babylonian history, many of the revolts or the rebellions or the plots, you might have a military leader that would link up with some of the wise men. You get the politicians and the military together. They would form a coup and then go after the leader. So Nebuchadnezzar is not a dummy. And so he knows that, if I just give him this, if I tell him what it is, they could kind of come up with something and kind of appease me. And the next thing you know, I got a dagger in my back. So to his credit, well done, O Neb, to be able to say, no, it's not just the interpretation. I want the dream. And of course, their response is, there's no way in the world we can do this. And so then he responds, how? Don't worry about it. Yeah, he's very angry, and not just angry, but is going to follow it up with what? Not just death. I mean, this is it's going to be, I'm going to cut you up, and I'm going to burn your houses down. So this is like a mob hit. I'm not just going to hit you. I'm going to hit all your family, and you're going to be wiped off your lineage is going to be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, I think some versions of the Bible actually will say, and your houses would be like a dung heap. And so this is which is turn to I hope it's in my notes. I hope I wrote this down. 2 Kings 25:7. Sorry, Teresa, it's not on the list. So for those at home, if she didn't have this in the notes, this will give you just a hint of the brutality of Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, 25:7. Yeah, 2 Kings 25, chapter 25, verse 7. So 2 Kings 25 gives you a little bit of, it's a parallel text to the book of Daniel about when Nebuchadnezzar is on the march in to take over the kingdom of Judah. And you get a little bit about what happens once he finds the king of Judah. So if somebody has it, you can just read it. Verse 7. Yep. All right. So just kind of think about your map. This is Jerusalem, which is where the kingdom of Judah would be located. So this is Israel. So one, they killed his sons in front of him, right? Then what did they do to his eyes? Yeah, probably with a knife. And then they bound him and they marched him over to Ur. So, yeah, just a simple little thing. Sunday stroll. So I mean, you get some insight into, it's not like they're, they're sitting at a tea party. So, he's not the nicest of guys. And so this to tell, and they were actually, I mean, you can go as deep as you want, and because one of the great things about the Babylonians is they kept good records. So you can research this. And, I mean, they were pretty good at, I mean, this isn't an empty threat about dismembering you and then burning down your house. That would be fairly common. So it's he's a nice guy. So we're going to invite him over to dinner tomorrow, and everybody have a good time. But anyways, he's laid this impossible task in front of the wise men, and it's not just give us the interpretation, which they would have had books for that. The real issue is not interpreting the dream, because they would have interpreted hundreds of dreams. Nebuchadnezzar is skeptical of it, just because you don't know if that could be used in some level of trickery so that he's assassinated. But the real issue is to tell me the dream itself. I mean, if you think about it, that's where the real struggle is. And yet they can't do it. And so his anger is definitely heated, which is when we get to, I think, the next chapter, when we look at the fiery furnace. And so that's a totally different setting where he's building this large monument. And they literally would have had like a furnace next to it to sort of heat up the bricks and to build the statue. So it's not just throw them in the heat. You'll find out that he cooks it up 7 times. Now, whether or not it's a literal 7, we don't know, but it's so hot that the people, that when they open up the front door of it, the flames come out on them as well. So, he's just, he's not warm and cozy. I mean, this is not the guy that, I mean, could you imagine working for this guy, So, but anyways, that's what's before him. And so he's very upset, throws out a level of punishment. But look at the difference between the punishment and the reward, all right? So if you don't do it, not just you and your family, but if you do it, then what happens? What is that, verse 6? Yeah, you get some goodie out of it, and gifts and rewards, great honor. Most likely it meant that you would marry one of his daughters. And so then you would be, so think about what that meant in that day. You then would be linked to his line and what have you. You would eat at his table. I mean, obviously he would care, the whole family system there. So some level of promotion, some level of office, married into the family. So same thing that, oh, sorry guys. Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate you reading my mind. Saul and David, so when David's a young man, and it's like if you can go and take care of Goliath, what happens? You can marry, one, you don't have to pay taxes, right? So your income's set. You're going to eat at my table, which means I'm going to give you a salary, and you're going to marry one of my daughters, right? So that was what the goodie that David received from defeating Goliath. So same thing here. I mean, this was common in the ancient world, that most likely meant you'd be a part of the family, get some level of status, and all that comes with that. So there we are. That's the situation. So let's keep going to see how this thing turns out. So if somebody would read verses 7 through 9.
Once more they replied, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is just one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me.
So again, some level pressing their luck, right? I mean, I guess if you're out of, if you don't have any more outs, you can always plead for more time, right? And so that's really what they're doing. They're pleading for some level of help. Nebuchadnezzar sees through that. This idea that does anybody have in your versions of your Bible something different than trying to gain time? That'd be verse what, 8?
This is the Living Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, trying to stall for time until the calamity befalls me that the dream foretells.
Yeah, so the idea is that if or either your anger subsides, and if this is a dream that would end in some level of assassination or revolt or rebellion, then perhaps that would come to fruition, or maybe your anxiety around the dream goes away, and the penalty of death sort of is lost into Never Land. But for Nebuchadnezzar, he's not having any of it. And so there's, in his mind, this is, again, what's at the forefront. I mean, he's struck he's disturbed, perplexed, he's anxious, great anxiety, maybe even to the level of panic, can't sleep. And so it's about to, as my son would say, it's about to go down, Daddy. So there we go. So, I mean, hmm? That's right. Yeah. So the first request is no. That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's like an impossible task, and so because if he would have told them the dream, they had manuals set up to where they could say, okay, the stars could either mean these three things. The night meant this, or in this case, we're going to know that it's a statue, and so they had all these dream manuals. Already, and there were volumes of that in the library, and so they could have easily come up. Now, whether or not it would have been I mean, some of that stuff it could be so loosely and it's in translation, kind of like a horoscope, or go to a Chinese restaurant. You read the fortune cookies, right? Yeah, so you're going to have a great day. So I mean, you're like, all right, so somebody's going to come into your future, right? So I mean, they would have given them that type of answer, but it was, that was part of the practice. So for him, he doesn't want that. I mean, obviously he perceives this to be about him personally, or at least that's where his beginning. That's where he starts. So it's naming the dream or describing, telling him what the dream is. That is the first big hurdle. And I mean, who knows what that would be? I mean, because we're going to read what the dream is. I mean, who would have ever, thought of that, right? So, for them, on one level, you have to ask the question then, why would Nebuchadnezzar, do this to all of his advisors? Because he's also, I mean, could he be cutting his nose off to spite his face? Hang on, I'll get it. And, what most people believe, and I think this is accurate, is that he probably felt that the dream definitely was some level of disaster for him. And, we know that it's a statue. The statue is destroyed, or eventually we'll know that if you haven't read the chapter. And either that's about him personally or about his kingdom. And then at the same time, in their culture, assassinations were fairly rampant. And these wise men, these advisors, could be either manipulated or used in some form of that, either by a military person or somebody else, maybe a family member, that could somehow lead to his end. I mean, think about, so it's not just the Babylonians. Think about King Herod. I mean, you remember King Herod? I mean, King Herod killed his wife, he killed two of his sons, and I think two brother-in-laws throughout his reign. All out of fear that he in a village. Yeah. So I mean, he wasn't a nice guy either. So I mean, I'm just talking about for his family, So whenever some level of ruler in the ancient world is fearful that their time is in jeopardy, I mean, it's like backing a tiger into a corner. And so it's not just the Babylonians. You see this in a number of different people and different, what we would call countries or empires that they wanted to hold on to their power. And these were people that sometimes they didn't always operate with the utmost integrity. And well, it could be, yeah. So there's some people who would, that's a conclusion that you could draw, is that, I could be, I'm going to weed them out anyways. But these are people that he chose, right? So I mean, I just think it's it's trying to safeguard his own future, and will do whatever it is in order for that to take place. And of course now, they're pushing him on it, obviously out of their fear. I mean, think about what. So this is a larger lesson for us. Think about what happens when people are in a state of fear, and then what that does to your decisions. Now, I mean, this, for some of them it's physical, all right? I mean, life and death. But just, we could parse that verb however we wanted to when you think about the decisions that we make whenever when we start. I mean, fear is normally a half narrative that you tell yourself, or a false narrative, but it has some elements of what, it's not just out of the blue. But what happens is you begin to go down a path that might, where something that could be a possibility, you then move it to the level of probability, and then maybe at some point it's a perceived reality. But and that happens. I mean, it happens to all of us. So I'm getting a little bit of, but I mean, it's. I mean, think about what happens when fear. I could play a narrative out for my children all day long. I mean, I just, it's, and then whether or not that's going to come to fruition, probably not. I mean, there's more evidence that it wouldn't, but, one bad decision, then, the dominoes start to fall or whatever, and so it's easy to do, or something. I mean, just Auburn fans. Anybody in here? I know you don't want to admit it. I mean, so have you not played out the entire season already? Which I have, and it's it's a possibility that we will not win another game. It's easy to go from a possibility to a probability, and the truth is, by next week it's going to be a reality. All right, so I mean, we can do that, and so this is not where, I mean, to some degree, Nebuchadnezzar is just human.
I think we're seeing in our modern world that Putin is a leader, a powerful leader, who is threatened,
Mm-hmm.
his power
Sure.
is threatened, and it's made him make bad decisions, and he's been absolutely ruthless,
Mm-hmm.
not only with Ukrainians, but with his own.
Sure. So I mean, he's not the only one, and and so you think about what happens when someone who has power, who is in jeopardy or fearful of losing that in some form or fashion, what happens? And I mean, this is an old story that has been around for a long time, and Nebuchadnezzar is not he's not he's not better or worse than anybody else given the situation. And and he has these dreams, at least one, maybe more dreams, or maybe the same dream over and over, and it's petrified him. And so he, if you've got absolute power, he did at that time. You think about what the sword that you now wield. I mean, it's and you got these people that are fearful for their life, so they're trying to come up with any way to aid their side. And, so you see, so that, again, so we started out with Nebuchadnezzar having these dreams, or at least one dream. It's at a point where he's in frenzy about it. And then he brings in the leaders, or at least the advisors. They're no help. He becomes even more angry, backed in a corner even more. And so then, I mean, the stakes are now being raised more and more and more. And so eventually we're going to get to Daniel. And they're trying to appease, to gain some level of time, either to where the dream happens and Nebuchadnezzar is no more, or at least his anger subsides. And so there we are. So let's keep going, and let's look at verses 10 and 11. If somebody would read those two.
The astrologers answered the king, "There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among men.
Yeah, so now we see a little bit of a turn, at least from the advisors, by pretty much admitting this is the impossible task. There's not anybody who can do this on earth unless deity. And right now it's Babylonian polytheistic deity world. But when you get to when Daniel gets in, so this is the reason I want us to stop at 10 and 11 for a second. Just kind of put a pin in the back of your mind about what the astrologers say, who are supposed to be the wise people, supposed to be the ones who have knowledge, who have wisdom, who have understanding, who know certain things that might be hidden, say to the average. And what they admit is nobody can do this unless somehow it's revealed to them, and in this case, from their understanding, by the Babylonian gods. When we get to Daniel, so if you don't know the rest of the story, Daniel gets, all of a sudden, the executioners are on their way. Daniel gets word that he's about to be lumped into all of them as well. And so he and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they get together, they pray. Daniel is given in some level of a vision or insight, the dream and the interpretation. And then he makes haste to the king and tells the dream. But in a few moments, we're going to end today when we look at this. This is his praise or his prayer, his hymn that he sings after receiving the vision from God or the knowledge from God about being able to answer what Nebuchadnezzar wants. But there's sort of a play on words or a play on concept between the astrologers, the advisors saying we can't do this unless God a deity gives us the answer. Daniel actually says the same thing, but he says, "My God has given me the answer." So I mean, it's interesting if you were to lay out this chapter, all this going up to verse 10, 11 has been set in the stage between these advisors who are asked to give a dream and interpretation. They cannot do it, but they admit the only way that someone can do it is through revelation. And Daniel prays the same thing, but he receives revelation and actually has the dream and the interpretation. Not unlike who in the book of Exodus? All right, who's to stand out in the book of Exodus? Moses. So remember, Moses goes before Pharaoh. They throw down their staffs, snakes. He throws down his snake. His eats theirs. All right. So I mean, and then all the plagues are, each plague is designed to address the one deity in the Egyptian pantheon. I mean, that's like the flies, the frogs. I mean, they were all in the Egyptian world. God and goddesses had animal faces, whether it be like a cow or a frog or the goddess over the Nile or the water and abundance and things like that. And so each plague tackles basically it's a shot across the bow at the Egyptian deity world. And this is the same thing. So it's interesting how this plays out. So anyways, so there we go. We have the advisors pretty much disclosing that they can't do anything unless they receive some level of divine intervention, some level of revelation. So let's keep going and see how this plays out. So if someone would read verses 12 and 13. So here we have it now. This is where Daniel is introduced into the chapter. Up until now, it's been Nebuchadnezzar and the advisors, but the spillover effect has happened. Daniel, and this is why most people believe that Daniel has completed the 3-year period of time, because he is in the in the building of all the advisors. I mean, he's part of that group, which means he would have graduated from the program, assigned some level of office, and so he's now being lumped in along with the other three in this large group of either wise men or advisors or astrologers or whatever it may be. He's part of that system. And Nebuchadnezzar is not just after the ones that were talking to him in the beginning of the chapter. He's now going to put to death all of them. And so the word gets to Daniel wherever he's at. Maybe he's out on, we don't know his location. Maybe he's in the city, maybe he's out in the provinces or what have you. But now he's a part of it. And the captain of the king's guard is either there to either give, this is where there's a little bit of disagreement. Either what's his name, Arioch is there to either say, unless you know the dream and the interpretation, you're going to be killed, or he's there with axe in hand. We don't know exactly, which one. The text is a little unclear whether or not he's there to say, here's the decree from the king, unless you can give me the dream and the interpretation, you're going to be killed, or time is up and you're next in line for the guillotine. That we just don't know, but we know it's definitely a heightened environment. There's levels of haste that are involved, but Daniel now is a part of it, and so Daniel hastens to the king, or at least to get some level of. I haven't gotten that far yet, so let me not go that far. So let's keep going then, verses 14 through 16, and then after this we're going to take a break. Sure. Oh, yes. Yeah, Daniel's part of, so if you think of it in terms of this way, you've got anybody that's considered an advisor or what, and I'm using a New Testament word, wise men, a magi. They're people that can either read the tea leaves, look at the stars, and somehow predict current events or future events. There's a whole group of these people in the Babylonian system. And in the beginning of the chapter, he gives us at least a breakdown of them. Some of them are sorcerers, some of them are Chaldeans or astrologers, some of them are, what does it say? Go back and look at verse. Yeah, look at verse, what is that? Verse 2, magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and then you got astrologers or Chaldeans. So there's at least four levels of people, or at least, there's four different groups of these people who are wise men. Daniel is part of them. So when he graduated from the 3-year program, he would have been assigned, some level of leadership amongst these four groups. But Nebuchadnezzar is after all four of the groups. I mean, if you're basically part of this group, you've got a sentence on your life. And so Daniel is guilty by association. And which is why when either the word gets to Daniel, or the guard who are coming with the swords, or at Daniel's, at the county line, he's now aware of what's about to happen, and he's part of that group. So, did we read 14 through 16? Okay, yeah. Someone read 14 through 16 if you would. Yeah, so we don't know like in verse 15, he declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the degree of the king, some versions say so urgent, the other versions say so harsh. Yeah, so we don't know if it's really, is he talking about the severity of the punishment, or is the urgent of why are you killing us all right now? But either way, I mean, it's a little bit of both from the context. But David now is a part of this. I keep saying David. Daniel is a part of this. And time is of the essence. So upon hearing or at least sensing that the axe is about to fall, Daniel makes a request to the king, probably through Arioch, all right? Give me a little bit of time so I can figure it out, or at least pray or do whatever. So, and that's what we're going to find out after we take a break. All right, so let's take a break for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then now, just we're not going to finish the chapter. We're not going to get into the dream and its interpretation. I want to finish with the prayer, because the dream interpretation it needs its own lesson. All righty, let's go ahead and come on back. Ooh. All right, let's go ahead and we'll jump back in. Yeah, sure.
Y'all please put Peyton Booth on your prayer list. She's right in the middle of the end. My granddaughter, Peyton Booth.
She's right in the middle of. I didn't catch that. Oh, yeah. So there are a number of people that. I mean, just from our staff alone, I think there are 3 or 4 family members that are in the Tampa. So, hello. So, yeah. So, sure. I don't know. I can't hear her. All right. So, any other announcements? Yeah, but there are a number of folks that are we were yesterday when our staff was getting together. I think there are 3 or 4, either siblings or family members that are in the hurricane's path, and so I mean we probably have a ton of folks that probably will be affected by that. All right, so let's come on back and we'll jump back into the passage. We at least want to get to the end of this prayer, which is verse 23. So any questions or comments from the first 16 verses that sort of on your minds that maybe you were thinking about during the break?
And you don't know if Daniel went in to see the king or Arioch?
Yeah, we don't know. I think it's Arioch because later on when Daniel, like if you look at verse 24, even though we're not there yet, therefore Daniel went to Arioch. So this is after he has the dream and the interpretation. Most likely he went through the mediator. Yeah. So, but that's, yeah. So when you get to verse 24, it's clearer. And some of that has to do with, is Arioch coming to tell the wise men, hey, you weren't at the meeting, but guess what? You're now a part of the problem. Or is Arioch coming with a sword, to do the deed right then? So. Oh yeah, there was. I mean, very much so. The question was there a hierarchy amongst the group of wise men? The answer would be yes. And most of them would have been by trade, for lack of better words. If it's, if you're astrologers, you had your level of hierarchy. If you're, sorcerer and what have you. But yeah, there definitely, there would have been levels. There would have been levels amongst the 4, and then there would have been levels inside of each one of the 4. And Daniel is, at this point, is probably at the bottom of the rung.
But in chapter 1 it said God gave Daniel special ability to understand the meanings of dreams and visions.
Which probably meant he would have been put in the 4 of the 4 groups. He would have been placed in the ones that can interpret dreams and visions.
Yeah, and Arioch should have remembered that, but he obviously had forgotten.
Well, I mean, that's a pretty good leap in my mind of what. All you're getting is Daniel's perspective, right, from chapter 1, right? So if Arioch was writing, he'd probably say, look, I got about 1,000 people that are under my care. Yeah, Daniel might be the brightest, but he's 18. You know, he's not 40. This is not a guy with a big beard, got a long resume and CV and all that. He's just young buck right out of the gate. You know, got one success, but that's really about it. You know, so but now he's at the hold your comment to the end of chapter 2. Because he gets promoted, big promotion after chapter 2. But at this point, I would argue Daniel might be a good high school recruit. He's not a D1 player yet, and he's surely not in the pros. All right, so he's a red shirt preferred walk on. That's what he is. You know, yeah, he's not 5-star yet. At the end of chapter 2, he's 5-star. At the end of chapter 7, he's starting quarterback for the Rams. I mean, you know, so well, they're another Super Bowl winners, right? So I mean, yes, I mean, you know, there's a level of progression that we can follow with Daniel. He's just not there yet, because all you know, we get a summary statement at the end of chapter 1, which is what you were noting, but that's a summary statement that could also be a foretelling of the rest of Daniel's history. But at the end of chapter 1, we do know he has some level of ability, and that's highlighted, but he's nowhere near. I mean, if he would have been of the utmost importance, he would have been in the beginning of chapter 2. You know, so Daniel doesn't even get wind of this until it's now made its way down to just the guard. But that changes. So let's get to how it changes. All right. So let's jump back into verse 17, and let's do. Someone read 17 through 13, and this is going to be the last text for us today. What was that? Did we already read 17? No. Oh yeah. Thank you very much. So, well, it's I haven't been sleeping well, seriously. And my dogs, I don't know what's going on with our dogs, but they're getting me up. It's like 5 nights in a row. And if I ever wake up and I'm up for more than about 10 minutes, it's hard for me to shut my mind back off. So I'm having a dream. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. I wish I was having a dream, you know. So when I am sleep deprived, you've already figured out I stutter. But at the same time, I'm like a squirrel. I'm just all over the place, you know. So 17 through 23. Let's do that, all right? Yep, 17 through 23. Now, if you could read 17 through 13, go right ahead. But all right, someone read 17 through 23. Yep. All right, thank you. What's the first thing that Daniel did? No, that's not the first. Go back. There you go. He got his friends, and then they did what? They prayed. Yeah, so, which is interesting because you'll also find that is also this is going to be a characteristic of Daniel. When you start to move in through the latter passages of the book, Daniel does not have a problem or struggle with putting people around him of what I would say similar character, people that he trusts, things of that nature, and then asking them to pray. Actually, what Daniel is faulted for, and I think it's in chapter 7 with the lion's den, is that he actually goes up and prays part of his daily schedule. And there's a little bit of jealousy amongst some other folks, and they out him for praying. And then, of course, that's a violation of the king's law at that particular time. And, of course, because he's not supposed to pray to his God, he's supposed to pray to Nebuchadnezzar's God. But Daniel, there's something that this is a learning. This is definitely something for us to, I think, to pay attention to. Obviously now Daniel has, like the other wise men, has a heightened sense of anxiety. Because now he's been linked in or looped in to all the wise men. They have a punishment that's set before them. It's going to end in death. And so there's a sense of anxiety in Daniel because he doesn't know what God's going to do. Now, we can read the passage and we think, oh, it's no big deal. Daniel's going to go up with his buddies. They're going to have lunch and they're going to pray a little bit, and all of a sudden God's going to show up and going to take care of the day. He doesn't know that. And so what he does do in an unforeseen future is to call 3 people that are close to him and share the burden. And the way they do that together is by praying. So now we might not be in the same situation of Daniel. Of Daniel, but there are situations that at least are of a level of heightened anxiety in our own life, normally because of the situation, whatever that might be. And so there's a lesson in learning to, not with everybody, so he's not casting his pearls, in front of everybody, but at least 2 or 3 who obviously they know Daniel. They were part of the group in chapter 1. They have levels of faith, right? Because it wasn't just Daniel that said, hey, look, I'll eat the food. They can eat from the king's table. No, it'll be Daniel and the 3. And so there's at least a level of faith. There's a level of concern. Probably, I would also argue, a level of friendship. Maybe even family relations, because they would have chosen from royal families or back when Nebuchadnezzar pretty much wiped out the Judah. But what they do first is gather together, share their burdens in the form of prayer. I just think that's noteworthy for us. I don't know why, and then I sometimes can be guilty of this myself. Sometimes there's something inside of us that wants to push against that level of disclosure and vulnerability, because we perceive that others will think of us as being weak or something being wrong. And so what we do is we keep people at arm's length. And what you miss is, it's been my experience that when you push through that and you do disclose, again, to just a certain, trusted group, what you find is greater closeness, intimacy, friendship, koinonia, to get, all that. But just there's just sometimes we just don't, it's like we don't believe it. Because it takes, in order to do this, you have to, you put yourself in a place where you feel exposed. And normally what you find out is that whatever your situation is, the truth is, it's probably one of about 1,000. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I used to have a psych professor in grad school that said, there's nothing new under the sun. We just think that because it involves us, that somehow it's new. No, it's just new to us. And so there's something to Daniel. Before anything, he asked for help. And he asked for help from 3 that are trusted, at some level of relationship already, and they pray together. And so we have the answer. So we get that Daniel does receive in a vision. Now, we don't know if Daniel slept on it and he had the vision in the night, or if in the vision means that just the answer came to him, like in Revelation. We don't know. I mean, most of us think, when we think of visions, we think somebody got to go to sleep, have a dream, and then all of a sudden you wake up. That might have been the case. I don't think Daniel slept on this one. Just because of the environment. I mean, he's under a death sentence. So I think somehow at some point after they prayed, there is some level of understanding of not just, he gets both, the dream and the interpretation. And this is his response. So then his first response after this is praise. And so what I want you to see here quickly is, obviously it's set apart. So this was probably something that was written from Daniel. The language changes from, notice that it changes, the pronouns change at some point. So this is probably something, even though it might be in an official Babylonian document, because the language changed from Hebrew to Aramaic, this is Daniel's, what most people believe this is Daniel's words that have been inserted now into an official document. I mean, think also Daniel, to Gene's point, will be promoted, and actually it spends the rest of his life in the Babylonian, government, for lack of better words. He's there all throughout Nebuchadnezzar's reign, actually even into some others. So by the end of Daniel's life, Daniel is known. He's no longer a preferred walk-on. Well, he's up the ladder. So what most scholars believe, and I would agree with this, is that he would have had the ability at that time to insert his own pen into an official document. But notice what it does. So again, think back to the statement or the question I asked, or at least I told you to pen something in your mind. In the beginning of the chapter, you have these advisors, these different levels of wise men, whose job is to know things that are hidden, either for current day or at least for future. And they cannot do it. And Daniel, low on the totem pole, is able to know the things. He actually will, he's in the process, what we're reading is he's bringing it to light, and it's all because he's connected to Yahweh. And so notice how, just read the prayer, and just you see the themes of this entire book: God's sovereignty, God's wisdom, God's ability to take something that's hidden and now bring it into light. It was what we would call revelation then. But this is a great prayer, or just a statement of praise. Maybe, it could even be like a hymn, things of that nature. But now it's all addressed to God, Yahweh. And so you have to, if you look at the whole of chapter 2, where you have, again, the advisors who cannot do it, and they admit they can't do it unless they receive revelation from God or a God. In their life, it would have been the Babylonian deities. Daniel says the same thing. Nobody's going to know this. Gets his three together. They pray. He receives what was hidden. Now it becomes to light, and it's all at the hand of God. Now, what we'll see next week, when we look at when Daniel actually is before the king, and then when Daniel gives the dream and the interpretation, and we're going to look at what that might mean. Daniel actually starts where, in front of the king, he admits the same thing that the other advisors do. What you asked was impossible. However, there is a God who is above them all, who has now given the meaning, and this is what it is. And so this is sort of like Daniel in his prayer journal upon receiving the answer. Notice the joy, notice the relief, and notice the praise of attributing to the one who granted the knowledge. It'd be interesting to see, because I'll just go ahead and tell you some from next week. When Arioch goes to the king, he says, "I found the guy." Yeah. When Daniel goes, "It's not me. It's all God." What would you do?
It seems to me the miracle in
Right.
being overwhelmed
Sure.
with Babylonian culture
Mhm.
and people, and that he can hang on to his faith.
Yeah, so the comment, if you're at home, is that one of the great things about the book of Daniel is that Daniel, in a completely foreign environment, is able to stay true to his own faith. And that is one of the major themes of the book of Daniel. Because there, at least until you get in this first part, so Daniel's two parts, right? The first part is more historical. Second part is some visions and future. But the historical parts, it's really just one event after the other where they're faced with the temptation of how do I remain faithful in an environment that could care less about me, or at least my belief system. And because you have it with chapter 1. All right, do I eat the food? Chapter 2, who's the source of dreams? You get to chapter 3, Daniel's not in chapter 3. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that has to do with the fiery furnace. But they're asked the same question. Will you bow down in front of the statue? Then you get 4 and 5, and then 7, the same issue is around temptation when it comes to will Daniel pray when the decree is you can't pray? And what you'll discover is he actually goes up into his room. The window is open. And he prays. Which means it's the normal life for Daniel, regardless of what people, So so you got all kind of issues. Civil disobedience. You've got how do you remain faithful when you're a minority in a different culture, in a different climate. I mean, they're all, but it's, so there are some things that are easily applicable to us, in what we would do. It's not the same when it comes to minority to majority and stuff like that, but it's definitely true on, do you remain faithful in a world around you that might not be? And yet, but for Daniel, I think this prayer is fantastic, and I think it's poetic, and it's the themes of it. This is like a microcosm of the entire book of Daniel. God's sovereignty, God's wisdom, God is the bestower of that. God is the giver of these things, and that's contrasted against Nebuchadnezzar and his entire world. To you, my God. So this of my fathers, that's a term of intimacy. That's what that means. You know me, I know you. That's that type of language. And verse 23 really is a sense of like, whew, I'm not going to die. So you've made known all these things, and definitely made known to us the king's matter. All right. Anything before we dismiss? Comments, concerns, something unclear? And next week we're just going to devote it straight to the dream itself and then the interpretation, because this is where there's going to be a fair amount of disagreement among scholars, biblical scholars. Is it immediate, or is it totally in the future, like past 2022? So, and y'all can decide for yourself. So we'll see how it goes. All right, all good? All right, go in peace. May the Lord be with you.